All right, so we'll jump into module 1 straight away. So again, I apologize that we have to actually do, content on the first day classes, but we're only a once a week class, so we kind of have to, or else we're already behind schedule. Also, I hope you all appreciate that I didn't make you do like the stand up and say your favorite name and color thing. You're welcome. That being said, I do require you to do an online discussion post introduction of yourself, so, but at least then you can proof your writing. I don't know, that always kind of annoyed me. Anyways, so what we're going to talk about this lecture is going to be more very high-level background information. This is probably going to be the most theoretical class of the semester because there's no we're not even touching PHP yet. We're literally just going to talk about what is the internet type of thing in a non-punny, like in an actual legitimate question of how does the internet work type of thing. But yeah, so first we're going to talk about the history of the internet. Next couple of slides, I've got, also, can we just really appreciate this guy skateboarding on a keyboard? I don't know. He makes my day. I've got a timeline here of the history of the internet. I'm not going to go through it bit by bit. Main thing to know is, again, internet was started back for like military purposes, then eventually universities, and then, TCP/IP was invented in '73. Again, this is more of just if you wanted to go read through anything or if anything piques your interest, feel free to go Google it and kind of learn more about it. I'm definitely not, those are Jim's slides. Not throwing him under the bus or anything, but I don't know. They're there. The internet was basically, it's a modern invention. Again, all the things I could say about this, you guys know, you grew up with the internet. The internet's relatively new. Shocker. Main thing with that is that the internet is still kind of developing, and it developed recently. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It wasn't like people said, all right, we're releasing the internet 1.0. Here it is. It was a lot of random technologies back at the beginning that slowly merged together and kind of duct taped together, new things were added on to what we know as the internet today. And that becomes important because there's a lot of weird stuff with the internet and PHP and a lot of how these things interact, and it's because it was historically kind of patchworked and duct taped together. But yeah, there's a lot of users on the internet. Spam was basically invented in 1994. The inventor has apologized a year ago, which just cracks me up. He didn't realize what he was inventing. He was like the guy who invented the pop-up window, like spam. He didn't realize it was going to be used for spam, so he wrote in a letter saying he apologizes to the world. It's really funny. Regardless, there's a lot of people on the internet. All right, on to the actual kind of stuff that might actually be useful. So, what is the internet? So, you guys have learned HTTP in your Intro to Web Design class. There's a whole bunch more to the internet. These are just a very small list of various other protocols or parts of the internet that can be used for things. FTP, actually, did I break these down? Yeah, I do break them down. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of different parts to it. So the first one, talk about this is becoming more important with modern internet sites. The difference between HTTP and HTTPS. So HTTPS has a secure at the end. And basically what that means is that your traffic between your web browser and the web server and back is fully encrypted going to and back. You can tell that by, I think the screenshot is actually out of date now because Google just changed their UI. You used to be able to see the green padlock. Now I think it's flipped, so now it is, if it is HTTPS, you won't see anything. But if they are just HTTP, you'll see a warning saying not secure. Main thing with that is, there's no reason that any modern site should not be HTTPS. It's free to do. You just have to configure it. You can pay someone pretty cheaply to configure it for you. There's no reason to have sites that are just over HTTP. That being said, our test environment, can't remember, I think we flipped actually recently. Our test environment used to just be HTTP, which is why I would normally give this speech to be like, it's a test environment, it's okay, we're not putting any real stuff there. But I actually think our web space accounts are actually over HTTPS now. Regardless, if it is or isn't, it's a test environment. We're not putting any real data. Eventually when we make a login system, don't be typing in your real password into these things. Just keep the 1234 or something to that effect. Everything we do in this class is going to be kind of for a test environment. So it's not as important to have HTTPS. But if you're building anything for like a startup or a real I did not just call all startups not real companies. That definitely wasn't a slip. If you're working for a startup of your own or other real production companies, there, we covered it. there's no reason for your things not to be over HTTPS. It's a very easy way to help secure a lot of things with your site. This is, again, my full-time job, my day job is I'm an ethical hacker, and if we see a site that it's HTTP that we're testing, it's ours. We can do a lot with that, and we call that out as a high severity finding. So don't do that. FTP, or File Transfer Protocol. So you guys probably used in your 240 class some sort of FTP client to transfer local HTML documents up to your web space or your web server account. A popular one of choice is FileZilla. Other ones, I personally use WinSCP on my work and personal computer. For Mac, CyberDucky, is that a thing? Any Mac users? All right, Mac users, you probably already know what your FTP client of choice is. Good luck. I think CyberDuck is one, or is that an SSH client? Regardless, they all do the same thing. They all do the same protocol, which is to transfer the files from your local computer up to your web server. Again, you guys have all taken 240. You should know how to FTP into your web server. The host name is uwmsos.com. Username is your ePanther ID, and your password is your SOAS password. Do I have a slide on? All right, no. So I'll give my little rant now. SOAS passwords. So the passwords you set up for your SOAS web space accounts. Please, under no circumstances, use your same password as your ePanther password. So some of you just kind of went, oh, I definitely did that. Please go change it. So you remember how my whole little speech about how volatile and wild, wild west the student web spaces are? Yeah, you don't want to be using your, it's one thing to have you don't want to be using your real ePanther password on that, because the student web space account is supposed to be a test environment. It's super not secure. Like, breaches happen all over the place. Again, it's fine, it's a test environment, but it's one thing for someone to be able to breach in and see your, again, your crappy Facebook clone website. It's another thing for someone to have your ePanther password and go have PAWS access and access to all your financial information and your, all that stuff. So please set up a single unique password or for your SOAS web space account. If you've already set it to your ePanther password, go change it and change it to something that you don't use anywhere else. That's good advice in general. All of your passwords should be different for every website, but I'll get off my security soapbox. But specifically for this class, there's no way we can check this, so we just have to trust you. And again, you're leaving yourself vulnerable if you use your ePanther password for your SOAS web space password. All right, Ranto. SSH, secure shell access. This is basically a way to manage a server via like a command line. It's the new, we used to use way back in the day, Telnet was the way to do it. But Telnet was super insecure, it was unencrypted, so then SSH came to kind of replace Telnet. So again, the internet, that concept of how everything kind of is just layers and layers upon itself. Well, back in the beginning, we didn't care about security. We just wanted it to work. So we came up with this thing called Telnet. Well, now we have a more secure way of doing it, and it's called SSH. It's popular on most LAMP servers. We'll talk about what a LAMP server is later. But basically, it allows you, again, to communicate via command line to a web server. On Windows, PuTTY is a popular SSH client, although I think in the newest release of Windows, soon, if not now, if not near future, there should be people who are more knowledgeable than me. Is there an SSH client in Windows yet? For I know that you can get a Unix terminal, but I don't think you can do SSH with it. No. All right, PuTTY is a popular SSH client for Windows. For Mac, the built-in terminal in Mac OS already has SSH built into it, so that basically allows you to again access and send commands to your web servers in an encrypted manner. So an example here, Telnet would literally, if I were to send a username and credential, username and password to a web server, it would literally transmit across the network in clear text, and then someone like me and my team could intercept that and see what your password was. Whereas something over SSH, which is encrypted, when they send their username and password through, it comes through across the network as gibberish. So even if we intercept that traffic, we can't get any useful information from it. Whois. So one thing to know kind of about the internet just as a general leading up to this point is that, again, since it wasn't just invented off, it wasn't just made, one day it was just turned on. It just kind of has been layering and layering on all the various technologies. There isn't, with the exception of what I'm about to talk about, there isn't really one regulatory. It's not like one country owns the internet and like is able to regulate the internet. And when I say the internet, I'm referring to the World Wide Web that we're used to. North Korea's version of the internet is run by a country, but that's not what I'm referring to. The World Wide Web, as we know it, does not have a unified one country regulatory agency, but it does have a few internationally agreed upon standards and a couple independent nonprofit organizations that help oversee some of the aspects of the internet. The main one that I'm going to talk about here is ICANN? Nope, ICANN. So ICANN has this thing called WHOIS, which basically says that for anyone to own a website, like for you to have a website on the World Wide Web, you need to fill out a form and send a bunch of information to ICANN, which stands for, that's a good question, International Consortium, before I talk out, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Rolls right off the tongue. But basically, you have to register with ICANN in order to have a website on the public-facing World Wide Web. But what you can do with that is, and that information needs to be publicly available for anyone to see it. So you can look up websites by doing what's called a WHOIS lookup, and you can get a lot of cool information about a website. So let me look up uwm.edu. I will say last time I was using the ICANN specific WHOIS lookup, their website was a little funky. Since the information is publicly available, there are plenty of third-party sites. If you just, yeah, goo, that's definitely what I meant. Why is, I'm in, oh my god, I'm in Edge, that's why. Anyways, that's fine, it'll be fine for now. If you just search WHOIS lookup, you'll see literally like 50,000 different places that all do the exact same thing, because they're all accessing the same international database. But here, oh, I'm not doing that one then. How dare you call me a robot. Let's try this one. Clicking random websites in class. That's always smart. Perfect. Alright, so a couple things. This gives information you get by looking up a WHOIS record. So one, you get to see if, hey, does anyone already own this site? Because again, for a site to be officially registered on the internet, they have to submit information to ICANN and such. You can look it up on a WHOIS lookup. So in this case, darn it, I can't buy uwm.edu because someone already owns it. Information you can see on a WHOIS lookup. I will say the other one was formatted prettier, but I'm not a robot, so you can see the IP addresses for the website. You can see what it's classified as, in this case, education. You can see, what's some good ones? You can see when the website was registered. You can see when it was last updated. I always think that's kind of cool. So you can kind of see. Now, this is like not the actual website itself, but the record of the website. So that means in 2018 they had to go update some of the metadata about like who owns this site or something. Creation date's always kind of cool. Apparently UWM got their website in '89. You can see when their registration of that URL expires if you really wanted to try and like snipe that website. Now, given every modern, actually competent organization would renew well before the deadline. Whether or not UWM does that, no, I'm kidding. I'm sure they do. But again, so if you have if you're trying to find an old, if there's a URL that is not used anymore, it's a dud, and you kind of want to take over it, you can keep an eye on, see when does their registration lapse, and see if they don't renew it. You can see DNS servers. Yeah, and that's basically a lot of the. Let's see, where does it have? Does it not have the one thing I actually wanted it to show? Of course not. Fine, I'm not a robot. All right, what do we got? Okay, all right, and it's not loading the one thing I actually wanted it to show. Seriously?
Scroll down.
Oh, there. That's right. Thank you. That happened last semester. So apparently their thing up here doesn't actually show it, but if you scroll down, you see these things called registrant, administrative contact, and technical contact. So these are these are kind of interesting quirks, I think, for ICANN. So again, when ICANN was invented way back when, it was the super early days of the internet, way before it was the global phenomenon that it was. So part of the requirements for registering a website is you need to give a technical contact and an administrative contact for your website. But the rule is it has to be a real person. So that kind of blows my mind that, like, for UWM, we had to literally name Matt Barron and give his email and his phone number as our technical contact. Same thing with our administrative contact, apparently Beth. Actually, I've met her. But yeah. So again, this is again a good way to kind of look up information about who owns a site, and like if something's wrong with it. In theory, you can contact the technical contact. An example of that, again, in kind of my world of the cybersecurity world, if someone finds like a vulnerability on a site, this would be someone they would email to try and like, hey, your site's crap. Well, no, they'd say it better than that. But so it's kind of, again, a lot of cool information that you can look up about a site based off doing a whois lookup. Oh no, did I lose my spot? Lovely. All right. Ping. Ping is just a command that you can do to basically check to see if a web server is online. It also can be used to identify a website's IP address. Basically, for those of you who don't know, to access a command prompt in Windows, you hit the Windows icon in the bottom left-hand corner and type in CMD. And you get a button that says command prompt. Don't worry, we won't be doing too much in the actual command prompt here. But the main thing is if you want to actually ping a website, so to identify its IP address or to just see if the server's online, it's ping space and then whatever the website you want to check. So I'm just going to say google.com. And then basically we're going to send a request to Google. It's going to send a response back to our computer, and we see the little output here. So we see, hey, we got a reply from this IP address. Again, I'm blazing through this kind of whole IP addresses and networking side of things because that's not the point of this class. If you're curious about this type of stuff, the Cisco networking class with Khaled Saba is a great class to take. Also, if you're interested in going towards the security track, it's also a great class. Sorry, not biased at all. But one cool thing, again, for our purposes of our classes is with an IP address, because they registered with ICANN, this IP address is paired to an actual URL. So if I actually copy these numbers and type those in, did I copy it? Yes. And go straight to that, I'll still end up at google.com. Because when I go to google.com, really what's happening is your browser is asking ICANN and various domain servers, hey, what's the IP address of this website? Because the internet itself actually runs on numeric IP addresses, but humans don't like memorizing a bunch of numbers to go to things. I mean, I suppose phone numbers, but whatever. Regardless, we like words better. We like typing in google.com as opposed to 172.217.4.46. So that's just that's kind of a cool way to look up a website's IP address and also to see if it's online. If it were something that isn't online, hopefully that's not a real site. Yeah, it'll give you an error, basically say like we weren't able to successfully send a ping to that. So again, kind of a neat tool. Yeah. Any questions so far? And again, this lecture is going to be more kind of high-level background information. And then starting next week, we'll actually start using PHP and diving into things. I just like to give at least 1 week's buffer. You'll notice the assignment's more of like introduce yourself and make sure your stuff is working before we actually start with the real stuff, because I don't want things to go wrong. IRC, or Internet Relay Chat. It was basically it was a very popular application of the early internet. It was popular in the mid-90s and has basically come as a resurgent with things like Slack nowadays. But basically, it's popular among developers for sending quick messages to each other. It's a different protocol as opposed to email, which is a different form of communication on the internet. Yeah. URL. In theory, I think you guys learned most of this in 240. But URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator. Basically, it's the global address to look up various things on the World Wide Web. The parts of a URL. So the first part is always the protocol. So most of the time it's going to be HTTPS or HTTP if it's an old, broken, unsecured site. But in theory, there are other protocols if you're doing other things like FTP or something. // tells the browser to use the specific protocol. So like these two, the yellow and the red part together says, yep, we're going to be accessing the World Wide Web over HTTP. We're going to this web domain, which will be something dot something. Or if you have a subdomain, it would have a something dot whatever. So it's going to say, yep, we're going to go to uw.edu. And then also from that web domain and that web server, we need the subdirectory of SOAS. So again, from an actual practical standpoint, all of your assignments are going to be on your web space, and they're going to be in various subdirectories, various folders as you're organizing your different projects and stuff. So just kind of what a URL is, and kind of how to use it from that sense. Design aspects. So that's my wonderful. No, it's not mine. I stole it from the internet. But there is a. Yeah. Let me talk about it first, and then I'll explain why. So good design of like websites is tough to teach. I normally pull up examples, but you've lived on the internet. You know what a good site is. You are aware of what a good site is. Like for a design aspect, this class is not the class to teach you how to make aesthetically pleasing or good user experience websites. My job for this class is to teach you guys how to make functional web applications. This class is going to be focused completely on does it work? I don't care if it looks pretty. I don't care if it looks ugly. I care whether or not it does what it's supposed to do. If you want to learn how to make an actual good, well-designed, like aesthetic site, INFOST 685 with Rebecca Hall is a great class for that. But for this class, and again, I throw this out because a lot of people always get concerned of like, oh well, does it need to look like? As long as you're doing the requirements that are in the assignments, which they might say like you need to have a CSS background or something to that effect, but I don't care if your websites look the worst in the world. I'll be honest, I've seen a lot of students take that to heart, and I've seen a lot of really bad aesthetic-looking websites, and that's okay. Just for fun, just kind of while we're here, let's see how many of these are still live since last semester. Examples of bad websites. Seriously, control-click doesn't work anymore? Sure, that makes sense. Oh, yes, lovely. They got ad money off me for visiting them. They're probably like, why does UWM randomly visit our site once a year, or twice a year? Lots of crap, lots of floating stuff all over the place. Again, bad site. This is a little less important because my logic is all of you have worked with the internet. You've kind of, I keep wanting to say grow up, but that would be assuming too much. We have a lot of, people with a lot of different ages of life here. But you guys have used the internet in its modern. Oh, that one's dead. Oh, the heaven one was funny. It had a guy floating on a cloud, and he just kept going up every time you clicked. Oh, that one's actually not as. They must have fixed it because that one's not terrible. Bummer. Any other ones? Yeah, that's about right. Oh yeah, oh my. Yeah. Regardless, you guys know what a bad website is. My one caveat, so again, I do not grade aesthetics. With the caveat, and it's a very important caveat because one student took it way too far. If I cannot read the stuff on your website, you will not get credit for it. Do not do white text on a bright yellow background. Again, I don't care if it looks ugly, as long as I can see without going blind and having to use like my vision insurance. Again, I feel like that's a reasonable ask. But again, I keep saying again a lot. Whatever, I'm tired. Yeah, screw it. Once more. Again, if you want to practice making good sites, which you should, if you're going into like anything with web design or web development, please feel free to make your assignments look nice. I think there's a chance, I think one of the assignments has an extra credit related to that, but in general, any practice you do on making your sites better, more well laid out, is good practice. You should. That being said, like the extra credit, that should be a second priority to getting it working. This class is, you will only be graded on functionality. So your job is to make sure your stuff is working. And then if you want practice, adding, CSS bootstraps to, or Twitter bootstraps to it or something and make it look nice, by all means. But again, the primary goal of this class is to make functional applications. You guys know what a web browser is. Again, in theory, if you're doing real web development work, you should test your designs in various web browsers. I will be grading your assignments in most likely Google Chrome. All the major web browsers use PHP and render PHP basically the same, so it really shouldn't be an issue. But yeah, it's there. Technically, you should keep that in mind. Web fundamentals. Oops. So web browsers basically interpret HTML documents, as you guys learned in 240. They're used to create static web pages. So again, when I say static web pages, I mean web pages that don't change. You guys created, all your 240 pages where, you had your header or, your little HTML boxes, whatever it was. And whenever you went to that page, that's what it looked like. You maybe at most had a couple radio buttons that you could select between the two, or like a form that if you hit submit, yeah, it did nothing, but it looked cool. We're going to actually be able to take the knowledge from those classes, add PHP to the back end of this, and actually have those websites become dynamic and do a lot of cool stuff. But again, just very briefly, stuff that you guys learned in 240, basic HTML or basic World Wide Web content is normally HTML, CSS with maybe some JavaScript thrown in there. For HTML, the general syntax of having opening and closing HTML tags, header tag, body tags. Other things that are other things that will be kind of useful: table tags, unordered list and ordered lists and list items. Basic HTML tags. Again, if you're feeling like you forgot everything you learned in 240, feel free to review a little bit on that. There's a lot of good resources like lynda.com, W3 Schools, just to Google or YouTube search, or your old 240 stuff. Just refresh yourself. It'll make your life easier. CSS, cascading style sheets. This is how you make, aesthetic changes to your website. It allows for flexibility to make mobile friendly sites. Again, there will be CSS requirements for our assignments, but it will literally be something as simple as give it a background color. That's it. So. Yeah, again, practice your CSS if you want, but you'll need a bare minimum for this class. Frameworks are a way to quickly make things look nice. Twitter Bootstraps is a pretty popular one, where then you can basically take, your static HTML pages and then add the Twitter Bootstrap framework to it, and all of a sudden it looks not terrible, and you can design based off having a framework in mind if you want. JavaScript is a scripting language. It's a front-end scripting language that's used to make websites somewhat interactive. Think of annoying pop-ups, menus, or kind of any other weird stuff. JavaScript can be embedded in your HTML documents, or they can be pulled from an external .js file. Did I talk about it? I don't think I do. All right. I think I talk about this later, but I'll probably repeat myself anyways, but just because it's here. So JavaScript is what's called a front-end scripting language, which means that it runs on the user's computer when they go to your website, which also means that your front-end user can modify and edit any JavaScript you're using, which is why in the web development world, you can't rely on JavaScript to do any functional stuff. Because in theory, the user could have JavaScript disabled, the user could override their JavaScript. Someone like me and my team could intercept your JavaScript and try and make it do naughty things. These are all things of why JavaScript is more for bells and whistles as opposed to core fundamental functionality. For that, we're going to be again, you need a back-end language, which this class we're going to be using PHP. Pulling it all together, again, typically a website uses multiple languages and technologies: HTML, PHP, CSS, JavaScript, MySQL, etc. Good thing to kind of get into the habit of. So in 240, you guys should have learned how to look at the source code of a website by most browsers. Nope. Hitting Control-U in Google Chrome, F12. Each browser's a little different. And basically, that allows you, if we click on a random website, yeah, let's look at the terrible website here. Control U. This will allow you to see the outputted, final static HTML. But as we start to learn PHP, as we'll learn next week, you can't actually look up PHP code that way. That only lets you see HTML. So you are able, if you want to, ignore that line. You guys don't know any PHP yet. I'll talk about that next week. Basically, as you're kind of learning various stuff, looking at various examples you find online is a very good way. If you see something, you're like, oh, how did they do that? Kind of investigating. It'll help you guys as you learn how to as you're making your own websites and your own web applications to kind of see what other people have done and learning from what they've done. Any questions so far? Eventually we'll have the first. No, I take it back. We did have at least one question. I was gonna say but I get it. It's Wednesday night. I know. Set up your web space. Again, now everyone has said they've done with their web space, so I'm just not gonna breeze through this. Just gonna go through the highlights. It's for development work only. Can't use it for production types. Again, we can nuke it at any time. Not for commercial. It has to be for education only. Back up your work. Yeah. Oh, I do have that warning. Don't use your ePanther password. If you need to register or re-register, as in like if you had it set up previous semesters, but it's currently, if you go to it, you're not able to find it. It probably got turned to inactive because of after the semester break. So you can go to uwmsos.com/register, and that'll get you to the nice form where you can fill to return it on. If you have any issues, you can contact SOAS Tech. Contact information's there. Make sure that part of your assignment this week is going to be to make sure your web space is set up and working properly, because starting next week, we're going to be putting stuff on there. So you need to make sure that you have all your stuff set up right, or else you're going to be behind from the get-go. Again, we've talked about a little bit accessing your web space. So from the internet, you just go to your epantherid.uwmsos.com. One thing I should note is that I have set up specifically for like the examples in this class. I have INFOST440.uwmsos.com set up. Yours would be the exact same, except instead of INFOST440, it would be whatever your ePanther ID is. That's just a way so I was able to keep it separate. cPanel, you just add /cPanel to the end of it, and that'll allow you to access the cPanel. FTP, again, you mostly use FileZilla anyways, so, but that's that. Yeah, you go to it via the internet. One thing to point out, this is what your SOAS web space will look like, or similar. Sometimes we update Apache and it looks different. It'll look similar to this if you don't have any files there, or if you don't have an index page. And what I mean by that is a file that's named index.html or index.php. You guys should have used index.html in your 240 class. Am I correct in remembering that? So that was, how you can make a page basically pop up by default. Did I talk about this? No. Maybe? No. All right. Sometimes I run into the issue where I'll start talking about something and then on the next slide's literally talking about that. So in your 240 class, you had files called index.html, all lowercase, exactly how it is there, and that was what would automatically run when you ran your page. And if you didn't have that, something that would pop, an index of page would pop up with just a list of all of your files on your web server. For this class, I'm just going to give you a little warning. Again, next week when we actually start working with it, we're no longer going to be using .html extensions. You're going to be using .php for everything. And we'll go into explain that why later. But the main thing to just talk about now is just know what an index file is. Know in general what they're supposed to be used for. So that way when we teach you how to do it in PHP next week, you're not surprised. Again, cPanel, should have used that in 240. We'll use that when we set up databases. We won't be using that for at least like a month or so. That is what cPanel looked like when I took the screenshot. Oh, yeah. So when you go to cPanel, so if I go infos440.uwmsos.com/cPanel, let me actually do that real quick. That's hard to see up there. You guys see the URL bar? Alright. So if I go to that /cPanel, what's going to happen is it's going to redirect me. It's going to first automatically redirect me to HTTPS because we have it set up to be a secure connection. and it's going to throw this :2083 on it, which is a port number. Which again, if you want more information on port numbers, take the Cisco networking class. It's a great class. What you need to know for this class is that basically cPanel is an application that we run on our web space, on our web servers, and that it's free, it's open source, it's used on a lot of web servers. But it would get really not expensive, but like resource heavy to have an installation of cPanel on every single one of your web space accounts. Like, think about it, the equivalent of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a bad home PC example. If you've got 10 people who use all of your home PC together, because that makes sense, is it a good idea to install 10 installations of PowerPoint, one on each person's directory, or to install one installation of PowerPoint that everyone can access? Again, weird example. Regardless, what we do here is we have one installation of cPanel at kind of like the top level, which then all of your web spaces can access. So that's why it redirects you, even though like I started on my own specific one, it redirected me to the one with the port number. And if I log in, oops. Yeah, so you'll notice, like, again, you'll have very similar thing. It'll just be a different ePanther ID here. And this way it has all this, it has the information for my personal web server, but it's still just one installation of cPanel. Yeah, so again, it's a very popular amongst web hosting companies. It gives you a lot of good information about your current websites, like storage, bandwidth. So like, you'll see here my public IP address of it, my disk usage. I think you guys get 5 gigabytes, any databases you have. Again, it's just a cool way to, you can control a lot of stuff on your web server. You guys know how to access via FTP. Yep. File again. You guys took 240. Do I need to go over FTP again, just in general? Okay. If you do, if you have any questions, again, there's a lot of good tutorials online. Just Google how to use FileZilla FTP, or look at your old notes from 240. Yeah. Changing permissions. Are we done with the internal server too, Jack? Is that finally gone away?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's been gone?
Yeah.
I had one last semester and it was, okay. All right, so Jack says, who works in our tech office, that this is no longer a problem. I'm going to mention it just in case, because if you are running into the issue where any file that you put onto your web space whenever you try and go to the URL, pops up with internal server error, emails, yeah. Should they email Solis Tech on that one? What are we doing with that one?
Yeah, usually we'll have to deal with that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Email Solis Tech. Again, in theory, that's fixed. It was fixed like 2 semesters ago. Last semester, I had one student who, for whatever reason, was having it happen. It was just a configuration issue, so in theory, this shouldn't be an issue anymore. But if it is, email Solis Tech. Backups. We've already talked about keep backups. Once it's gone, it's really gone. There's a couple different ways you can do backups. One is you can do a local backup. That's where you literally just keep a copy of whatever you're working on your local computer. That's good. That's one source of file. I would recommend you keep an extra copy elsewhere, so like Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, external hard drive, whatever it is. If you just like drag the folder, like your public HTML folder, off in FileZilla, that'll back up all of your files on your web server, but it won't necessarily back up any of your databases. So that's where if you go to, so like FTP, if you just drag the folder down, that'll be good. That'll back up all of your files, but won't back up databases. Do I not have a, nope, all right. If you want to back up like databases, you can do that from cPanel. You can export a copy of your database and like have that also backed up. Again, you guys don't have any databases yet, so you don't need to worry about that. Backup recommendations, it really depends on what your website is, on what your backup policy should be. How important is your website? Are you Google.com? Do you really want the only copy of Google.com to be on one guy's flash drive? Probably not. Again, it's based off whatever it is. For this class, yes, all your stuff is testing environments and dev stuff, like just development, what's the word? Like testing dev environment. I'm missing a word there, but regardless, it's not real stuff. but it is your homework assignments. So they're still relatively important. So make sure you're backing up your work and making sure that you're keeping copies elsewhere. Examples here at SOAS, we back up every day. In some cases, we back up every hour. We keep our backups for months at a time. Once you get to kind of the enterprise level, so like organizations or businesses, generally all the backups are automated, which then makes like disaster recovery and disaster planning a lot easier. It's much easier to pull back from backups when things go wrong. Editing HTML documents and also PHP documents. So you just need a text editor of some kind. PHP is, there's not too many IDEs, like if you learned Java or something to that effect for PHP. If you find one and use it, by all means. For the purpose of this class, I'll probably just using a basic text editor like Notepad++. Just again, because these are pretty basic text files with some scripting code in it. Sublime's pretty good. Notepad if you want to be mean to yourself. Text Wrangler or Atom is pretty good with Mac. For Linux, Nano. You notice I was neutral. I didn't get into the whole Vim versus what's the other one? I always use Vim. Regardless, the Linux battle. There's basically whatever operating system you're using. Find a text editor that you like and want to use. Recently, I've been kind of experimenting with Visual Studio's code because it's free now, or it's free, and it's surprisingly been pretty good. So again, whatever you use is better. Whatever you're used to, keep it. That's fine. In class, I'll be sticking with Notepad++ just to keep it simple. Index pages. So we already kind of talked about it a little bit. So index pages are used to set the default page for a folder on a website. So if there is no index page in any given directory on your web server, it'll just default to that default index of page and just list all the files and folders on your website. So like for example for that, if I go to my, oh, that's right, I should probably hide this. If you want a sneak peek. No, let's see here. But here, where it's just listing all the stuff here, because I don't actually have something called index.php there. If I go in, again, this is the wrong week. This is just something I forgot to put away. Like this folder did have something called index.php, so then it was automatically running that page when I went to that folder. So again, that's where you end up where, like Facebook.com, you don't need to put anything at the end of it, but this used to work. I think they recently changed their developments, so I don't think this works anymore. Aha, it still does. Facebook still actually runs PHP. It's a modified version, but what I'm getting at is both of them led us to the same place because that was what they had set up as their default page because they had it set up as a proper index page. Now what I mean by proper index page, oh look, a screenshot of what I just tried to pull up. But yeah, so that's what happens if you don't have it. It just kind of gives a list there. Okay, what I mean by a proper index page is that it has to be properly named. In your 240 class, that was index.html, all lowercase, all one word, not homepage.html, not index underscore home.html, not index with a capital I. It was index.html, all lowercase. For PHP, we're going to be naming all of our index pages index.php, exactly as you see it here. Lowercase, all one word, index.php. No spaces, no capital I, no nothing. If you do it any other way, your browser's not going to recognize it as a valid index page, and it's not going to auto-run it. And going forward, you will lose points on that on your assignments if I have to manually type in index.php. They should always, once you just go to the directory, it should just always pop up automatically because you have a proper index page there. Other types of services have different types of index names. So if you use a Microsoft ISS client, default.htm is what theirs is labeled as, and there's a whole bunch of other ones, like if you're using ASP.NET or .NET or something to that effect. All right, for next week, for next module, you're going to have to do assignment 1. So we're going to go over that in a minute. You're going to have to do a discussion post. Again, that's kind of my trade-off for not accounting attendance for the first week because people are still coming and going. They're adding the class, they're dropping the class. The weather has been kind of sucky. So to get participation for this week, you're going to have to do a discussion post as an introduction. We'll go over that in a second. Buy the textbook if you want, or Google it and click the third link. Brush up on HTML/CSS. You don't need too much JavaScript for this class. If you wanted to, again, kind of refresh your mind on like a coding class, by all means. And then next week, we're going to do a brief review over HTML, and then we're going to actually start using PHP. So looking at assignment 1. So again, under module 1 on your site, that's it, yep. You guys should have all done the attendance thing. We've got the discussion and the assignment. I'm going to do the assignment one first. So we click on assignment 1, we see the instructions as well as where you submit it. This is going to be, you need to submit basically just a Microsoft Word document, giving me a brief write-up explaining what the following concepts are and what they're used for. Bullet points are fine. This is not, this is literally review. It's just to prove that you were at least somewhat paying attention in class, or you at least, Googled if you didn't know what some of these things are. But just, don't just copy and paste, write out your few, or just, again, a couple sentences. I'm not asking much here. Just briefly explain the following concepts and what they're used for. 2, register for your SOS web space and get it working, and then include a link inside your document. So your document will have, the breakdown of what these 3 things are, and then a link to your web space. I will then click your link and make sure it works. If it doesn't work, you're not going to get points for it. Work out any kinks or bugs that you need to get with SOS Tech or anything now, before it's due, going forward. Extra credit for this week. So the challenge extra credit, you guys haven't learned anything from the technical side, so it was pretty hard to make a technical extra credit. So hint, hint, nudge, nudge, this is probably going to be the easiest extra credit of the semester, so maybe do it. Basically, you just have to answer some of these questions. You have to answer the 3 questions down here. You have to answer all the questions in order to be eligible for any extra credit. 1, who is the technical contact for the UWM website, uwm.edu? Can anyone tell me where I might look up our technical contact? And remember? I can. Who is lookup? Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. I'm trying to give you all an extra credit point. Hint, hint. What is the IP address for the SOS web space? How would you find that? Ping! That would work. Also, there's a bajillion websites that'll look it up too. And copy and paste UWM's official definition of abuse of power and provide a source of where you found it. I'll give you a hint. You already agreed you read it. That one you can go figure out on your own. Regardless, again, this is probably going to be one of the easier extra credits. I'm trying to give you guys a little bit of a buffer, because some of the later assignments do get hard. Even some students who are pretty high flying, it takes a lot of effort, and mistakes happen. So I'd rather make it so you can still be successful, from a grade standpoint, as long as you're putting in the effort into the class. So give yourself the buffer, do the easy extra credits when they come across. Other thing you have to do for this week to get participation credit is to do that discussion, introduction, and course overview. So that's just the name of the module. In here, you got to do 2 things. You need to add a profile image to your Canvas user account. Makes it easier to match faces to posts. That being said, if you have, for whatever reason, you don't want to put your real picture on it, find an avatar, find a flower. I don't mind. Just something so I'm not looking at a bajillion of the gray silhouettes. Just helps me kind of as I'm reading through your stuff, to put a name, so I can kind of help associate a picture to it. So add some sort of profile image to your Canvas user account. And then write a short discussion post, basically introducing yourself. General background information. Do you have any coding language experience? What's your web design experience? What courses have you done at the BSIST? If you're not BSIST, why are you in this class? In a nice way. That sounded like me accusatory, but really, why are you here? What are your interests? What do you hope to do after graduation? Anything specifically you want to get out of this class? Generic introduction post. It's not much. Oh, hey. Nice job, Alan. Yeah, feel free to comment on each other's. It's not a requirement for the participation this go around, but again, you can be nice to each other. Won't kill you. Let's see. Apart from that, again, both these 2 things are going to be due January 28th, which is Monday at 11:59. One thing to note with that, because it got a little dicey once last semester. So all these things are programmed in to have a due date of, let's see here. Does it pop up actually saying? Somewhere on your end too it'll say, but basically 11:59. So 11:59 means 11:59. So fluke of Canvas, they count, if you turn something, they count this as 11:59 and 0 seconds. It's 11:59. So if you turn something in at 11:59 and 2 seconds to midnight, it's going to mark it as late. I'm probably not going to actually dock you for that, but let's just make it so you're not turning in things literally 4 seconds before midnight, because that just is a stressful situation for everyone involved. So I'm going to announce it now, so that way I don't have to deal with it. I'm going to listen to Canvas, so make sure you're turning in your things before 11:59 and 0 seconds. So 11:58 if you're really going nitty gritty here. But I've listened to Canvas. If it marks it as late, you get the 20% deduction. Again, I'm just trying to be fair and unified across the board. Why are you turning your assignments in literally 3 seconds before midnight? I don't know. But yeah. Any questions so far? All right. Welcome to the class. We're done for the night. The rest of the night's yours. If you have any questions, feel free to come and talk to me. If not, I will see you next week. Yes.